Chapter 1. The Janitor and the Challenge. The 42nd floor of Hunt and Langford LLP was brightly lit, even though the clock was nearing midnight. The massive glass windows reflected the lights of Manhattan, the city that never sleeps. Ellie Parker pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway, the steady squeak of the wheels blending with the hum of the vacuum she had just turned off. Her silver-gray uniform was stained in spots, but her bright brown eyes carried a spark of determination no one seemed to notice. She paused in front of the main conference room, where lights spilled out from the gap under the door. Inside, voices rose in animated conversation, laughter, and the clink of wine glasses. A big deal, most likely. Ellie tilted her head, listening, not out of curiosity, but because she wanted, just for a moment, to feel connected to the world she had dreamed of since she was a little girl growing up in the slums of Queens. She discreetly pulled a book from her worn bag, a law book in French, borrowed from the community library. Droit International, the bold title read. Ellie had taught herself French at 15 when her Haitian grandmother first began teaching her phrases. Now she read it in preparation for the day her résumé wouldn't be tossed out by top law firms. She turned a page, whispering the legal terms to herself as if they were prayers. The conference room door suddenly swung open. Ellie startled, and the book fell to the floor. A tall man stepped out, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his dark hair neatly combed. Alexander Hunt, CEO of Hunt and Langford LLP, known across New York's legal world as a genius and as a ruthless, cold-hearted man. His icy blue eyes swept over Ellie and landed on the book at her feet. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, edged with sharp sarcasm. "Sneaking a peek at company documents during your shift?" Ellie bent down to pick up the book, heart pounding. "No, sir. This is my book." Alexander raised an eyebrow and stepped closer. He glanced at the cover. "Droit International? You a janitor read international law in French?" He let out a laugh, devoid of warmth. "Seriously? Or are you just trying to impress someone?" Ellie tightened her grip on the book. Her pride stung. She knew who he was, Alexander Hunt, once featured in Forbes under the headline, "From Nothing to the Top." She had admired him once, but now his disdainful gaze made her want to strike back. "I read because I want to learn," she said calmly but firmly, "not to impress anyone." Alexander crossed his arms, a flicker of intrigue in his eyes like he had just discovered a new toy. "Learn? For what? To mop floors more efficiently?" He turned back toward the conference room, where the lawyers were still deep in debate. "Since you want to play smart, come in here." Ellie hesitated. She wasn't allowed in the conference room, but his challenging look made it impossible to walk away. She took a deep breath and followed him inside, still clutching the book to her chest. The air inside was thick with expensive cologne and tension. 7 lawyers in designer suits sat around a mahogany table. Scattered papers, a thick contract, and a half-empty bottle of wine cluttered the surface. An older lawyer, Mr. Grayson, was discussing something about binding clauses with a French partner. Alexander held up a hand to silence him. "Everyone, we've got an unexpected expert tonight." He emphasized expert with a mocking tone, then turned to Ellie. "This girl says she reads law in French. Well then, prove it." He picked up the contract, flipped to a dense page filled with small print, and tossed it to Ellie. "Translate this. If you're as smart as you think you are, do it." Laughter erupted around the room. Some lawyers shook their heads. Ellie felt their stares as if she were some odd creature at a zoo exhibit. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fury. He thought she was a joke, but she wasn't. She took a breath, set her book down, and began to read. Her voice was clear, each French word ringing like a rhythm. Clause 14.2. Party A agrees to transfer control of the assets within 90 days of signing, provided that Party B completes full payment before the due date. She paused, then looked straight at Alexander. "But there's a problem." The room went silent. Alexander frowned. "What problem?" Ellie pointed to a line of small text. "This footnote is mistranslated in the English version. It says if Party B fails to pay on time, Party A has the right to reclaim the assets and charge a 20% penalty. But the English version only mentions reclaiming the assets. If you sign this as is, your firm could lose millions if the partner defaults. Grayson snatched the contract, flipping pages with a pale face. She's right. How did I miss that? He turned to the others, panicked. Who approved this translation? Alexander stood frozen, his hand gripping the edge of the table. His gaze on Ellie no longer held mockery. It was something else. Shock? Frustration? He couldn't admit that a janitor had just saved the room from a disastrous mistake. No, he couldn't let her win that easily. Impressive, he said coldly. But don't think you can walk in here and act superior. Get back to mopping, girl. Ellie didn't move. She met his eyes, her voice low but cutting. I didn't come in here to act superior. You dragged me in. If you don't want the truth, don't challenge me next time. She turned and pushed her cleaning cart out, leaving behind a conference room thick with awkward silence. Alexander stared after her, his heart beating faster than usual. He hadn't felt this way in years, challenged, exposed by someone with nothing but her pride. A flash of memory crossed his mind. A poor boy in Ohio, standing in front of his class, mocked by a teacher for dreaming of becoming a lawyer. That boy had sworn never to let anyone look down on him again. But now standing at the top, Alexander Hunt wondered, had he become exactly the kind of man who once humiliated him? You're watching soul stories where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Past. The dim glow of the computer screen cast sharp shadows across Alexander Hunt's face, highlighting every chiseled angle. His corner office on the 42nd floor of Hunt and Langford LLP was silent, save for the clicking of keys and the occasional sigh slipping from his lips. The wall clock read 2 a.m., but sleep had never been a friend of his, not since he was a boy in Ohio, working part-time at a grocery store just to afford textbooks. On the screen was an email from HR with an attached file, Ellie Parker's personnel record. Alexander had requested it right after the incident in the conference room the night before. He couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the defiant look in that janitor girl's eyes that still lingered in his thoughts. Ellie Parker, he muttered, scanning the text. 25 years old, graduated with honors in law from Queensborough Community College. No elite law school, no glowing recommendations from big-name professors, just a long list of part-time jobs. Diner waitress, French tutor, janitorial staff. He frowned. Queensborough, a community college. How could someone like her read international legal contracts and spot an error his entire legal team had missed? He scrolled further to the notes section. Nominated for a full scholarship at New York University School of Law, but declined for personal reasons. Alexander paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Declined NYU? No one walks away from an opportunity like that unless... He opened a new tab and searched for Ellie on social media. Her profiles were nearly empty, save for a few posts about mock trial competitions and one picture with an older woman, presumably her mother. The caption read, "Thank you, Mom, for always believing in me." A dull ache gripped Alexander's chest, like an old scar being touched. He thought of his own mother, who once worked double shifts to pay for his college tuition. He hadn't seen her since the day she passed, right before his graduation from Yale Law. He shut the laptop and leaned back in his leather chair. Ellie Parker reminded him of himself, or rather, of the person he used to be. A poor kid with nothing but talent and determination. But he had buried that past, built a new identity. Alexander Hunt, CEO, genius, a man who let no one look down on him. So why did this girl make him feel so exposed? The next morning, Ellie stood outside the HR office, fingers tightening around her bag strap. She had been summoned for overstepping boundaries, a phrase that made it sound like she'd committed a serious crime. But she knew the real reason. Alexander Hunt. The man couldn't stand that a janitor had stunned an entire room of lawyers. She took a breath and pushed open the door. Inside, a middle-aged woman, Mrs. Carter, the head of HR, sat behind a desk. Alexander stood by the window, his back to them, sunlight casting his silhouette like a marble statue. Miss Parker, Mrs. Carter began in a firm tone, you intervened in a senior-level meeting without authorization. Are you aware that this could result in termination? Ellie felt heat rise in her face. I didn't intervene, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. I was asked to translate the contract. If I'd refused, you'd probably be accusing me of noncompliance. Mrs. Carter frowned, glancing at Alexander for guidance. He turned, his icy blue eyes sweeping over Ellie. You're quite good at making excuses, Miss Parker. But you don't belong in that room. You're a janitor, not a lawyer. Ellie clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream to talk about sleepless nights spent studying law, about the rejection letters, about her mother lying in a hospital bed with bills piling up. But she didn't. She didn't want their pity, especially not his. I didn't ask to be in that room, she said, locking eyes with Alexander. You dragged me in just to mock me. If you want to punish me for doing the right thing, go ahead. The room fell silent. Mrs. Carter cleared her throat, clearly unaccustomed to low-level staff speaking this way. Alexander remained still, but something flickered in his eyes, not anger, but curiosity. This girl wasn't afraid of him. She didn't apologize, didn't bow her head. She reminded him of a young Alexander, facing a teacher who mocked his dreams and responding with a brilliant essay. Are you finished? He asked, his voice low and sharp. No, Ellie replied. If this firm doesn't want to hear the truth from a janitor, then maybe the problem isn't me. She turned to leave, but Alexander's voice stopped her. Wait. Ellie paused, not turning around. She heard his footsteps behind her, his breath brushing the back of her neck. You're very confident, Miss Parker, he said, almost in a whisper. But confidence alone won't keep you here. You'll have to prove you're more than just someone who can read French. Ellie turned to face him. I'm not here to prove anything to you. I'm here to prove it to myself. She walked out, leaving Alexander standing there, fists clenched at his sides. That evening, Alexander sat alone in his office, the bottle of whiskey on his desk half empty. He wasn't drinking to get drunk, he was drinking to forget. But Ellie Parker's image kept returning her unwavering eyes, her steady voice. He reopened her file and read more closely. A small note at the bottom stopped him cold. Reason for declining NYU scholarship. Caring for critically ill mother. He closed his eyes, the memory hit like a wave. At 18, his mother had fallen ill, but he had chosen Yale over staying with her. That decision had taken him to the top, but it also cost him the chance to say goodbye. Ellie had chosen differently. She had given up her dream to be with someone she loved. Would he have had the courage to do that? He picked up the phone and called his assistant. Find out more about Ellie Parker. Everything family, finances, whatever you can. He hung up and stared out the window. Manhattan shimmered beneath the city lights, but for the first time in years, Alexander felt its emptiness. Ellie Parker was more than a janitor. She was a reminder of who he once was and who he had buried. But he wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. Chapter 3. Invisible Barriers. The tiny apartment in Queens smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Ellie Parker set a tray of food beside her mother's bed, where Marie lay with shallow breaths. Try to eat a little porridge, Mom, Ellie said, forcing a smile. Marie, her silver hair tangled on the pillow, shook her head. You should rest, Ellie. I saw you working all night. Ellie didn't respond. She couldn't tell her mother that the overnight cleaning shift at Hunt and Langford LLP was the only way to pay rent and hospital bills. This cramped apartment with peeling walls was shared with 2 roommates, a chef and a nursing student. Each month, Ellie counted every dollar, torn between buying her mother's medication or paying off tuition debts. But she never complained. Complaining wouldn't change a thing. She sat on the old wooden chair and opened her laptop. The screen displayed an email from Hunt and Langford dated 6 months ago. Thank you for your application. We have selected a more suitable candidate. Ellie had applied 3 times for intern, legal assistant, even as a secretary. Each time the answer had been the same. Without connections, without an Ivy League degree, her resume was just another ignored sheet of paper. Still, she kept applying. Hunt and Langford was her dream, a firm where the best lawyers fought for justice. Or at least, that's what she used to believe. She closed the laptop and looked out the window. Queens was a blur of gray buildings and car horns. She thought back to her days at Queensborough Community College, staying up late to study international law, dreaming of standing in a boardroom one day, debating with high-profile partners. But reality had taught her that dreams weren't made for girls like her, a Haitian-American girl from the projects, with no one to open doors for her. At Hunt and Langford LLP, Alexander Hunt sat in his office, staring out the glass wall at glittering Manhattan. But his mind was elsewhere. Ellie Parker, the girl with the unyielding eyes, had taken up residence in his thoughts. The report from his assistant that morning only made it worse. Ellie lived in a rundown boarding house, cared for a mother with heart disease, and worked 3 jobs to stay afloat. Not only had she declined the NYU scholarship, she had also won a national constitutional law competition in her sophomore year. So why was she scrubbing floors here? Alexander tightened his grip on his pen as memories returned. He remembered working at a grocery store, being mocked by customers for wearing torn clothes. He had sworn never to be looked down on again, and he had kept that promise. But at what cost? He had forgotten what it felt like to fight for something bigger than himself. Ellie, with her fierce dignity, reminded him of the boy who once dreamed of becoming a lawyer to protect people like his mother. He stood up and called his secretary. Schedule a meeting with Ellie Parker, today. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but he needed to see her. Not to apologize, Alexander Hunt didn't apologize, but to find out if this girl was really who he thought she was. That afternoon, Ellie stood outside Alexander's office, heart pounding. She had thought the conference room incident would be forgotten, yet here she was, summoned again. She knocked and stepped in. The office was vast walnut desk, shelves filled with thick legal volumes. Alexander sat behind the desk, his navy suit pristine, eyes as sharp as glass. Ms. Parker, he said, voice low. Sit. Ellie remained standing, hands clasped in front of her. If you're going to fire me, just say it. I don't need pleasantries. Alexander raised an eyebrow, a flicker of a smile playing at his lips. Fire you? Number, I don't waste talent. He slid a paper across the desk. This is an offer, an unpaid apprenticeship at the firm. You'll learn from the best, have a chance to prove yourself. Ellie looked at the paper, her heart twisting. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of, a foot in the door at Hunt and Langford. But the word unpaid cut like a blade. She worked 16 hours a day just to keep her mother alive. Unpaid meant losing her home, losing everything. And the way he said it, like he was bestowing a favor, felt like an insult. She pushed the paper back. Thank you, but I'm not accepting. Alexander blinked, clearly not used to rejection. You're turning down something hundreds of applicants would beg for? Do you even understand what this is? I do, Ellie said firmly. But I don't need charity from someone who doesn't believe I deserve it. If you think I'm only worth working for free, then you're no different from the people who toss my resume aside. Silence fell. Alexander looked at her, his eyes no longer cold but filled with something else, surprise, maybe even respect. This girl wasn't just smart, she had a self-respect he rarely saw in the legal world. He stood and approached her, his voice softer. You think I don't believe in you? Then why am I here talking to a janitor instead of closing $1 million deal? Ellie didn't flinch, though her heart was racing. Because you're curious, but curiosity isn't belief. I don't hate you, Mr. Hunt. I just hate having to beg people who never saw my worth in the first place. Alexander stood still, his hands clenched in his pockets. Her words hit like a punch, dragging up memories of professors at Yale who had dismissed him because he came from nothing. He wanted to say something to tell her he understood, that he used to be her, but he couldn't. Not Alexander Hunt, not the man who never admitted weakness. You're very determined, Ms. Parker, he said at last, but determination doesn't pay the bills. Think it over. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Ellie met his gaze without flinching. I don't need opportunities from someone who doesn't respect me. I'll find my own way. She turned and walked out, leaving Alexander behind, feeling for the first time in years like he had just lost a battle. That night, Ellie sat beside her mother, reading a law book under the dim light. Marie took her hand, voice weak. You don't have to do it all alone, Ellie. I believe you'll make it. Ellie smiled, but her heart was heavy. She had turned down Alexander Hunt, but did she have the strength to keep going? In his office on the 42nd floor, Alexander stared at the offer letter, twirling a silver pen between his fingers. Ellie Parker wasn't just a janitor. She was a reminder of the part of himself he had buried long ago, the part that once rejected pity to protect his pride. And for the first time, he wondered, could he relearn that from her? Chapter 4. The moment she spoke up. The 42nd floor of Hunt and Langford LLP was bathed in bright white light from sleek LED panels overhead. Ellie Parker pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, the cloth in her hand gliding over the glass wall of the main conference room. She worked silently, like a ghost, but her ears were always listening, not out of curiosity, but because the legal debates and multi-million-dollar deals that echoed through these rooms were the closest she could get to the dream of becoming a lawyer. Today, the conference room was more crowded than usual. Through the slightly ajar door, Ellie heard the voice of Mr. Grayson, a senior attorney with silver hair and a smug tone. He was presenting to a group of French partners, his voice full of confidence. Clause 9.3 of the contract ensures the parties share financial risk equally, he said, quoting from the English translation. Ellie paused mid-wipe, a flicker of unease rising in her chest. She had read similar provisions in her international law textbooks, and the phrase partage des risques wasn't as simple as Grayson thought. She stepped back and checked her watch. Her shift was almost over, but she couldn't walk away. If Grayson had mistranslated the clause, the firm could lose millions or worse, its credibility with international clients. Pulling out her phone, she quickly drafted an email to Alexander Hunt. She wasn't sure he'd even read it after their confrontation last week. He probably saw her as nothing but trouble, but she had to try. Mr. Hunt, she wrote, I happened to overhear Mr. Grayson's remarks about Clause 9.3. The English translation is incorrect. In the original French, the phrase partage des risques indicates that Party A bears full risk if liquidity conditions are not met. Please double-check before signing. She attached an excerpt from the original contract and hit send, her heart pounding. This wasn't her job, but she couldn't stay silent when she knew the truth. Inside the conference room, Alexander sat at the head of the table, his gaze shifting across the French partners. They were polite but visibly tense, clearly unimpressed by Grayson's interpretation. His phone buzzed softly. He glanced at the screen and saw Ellie Parker's name. His brow furrowed as he opened the email. By the time he finished reading, a rush of adrenaline surged through him. This girl had surprised him again. Excuse me, gentlemen, Alexander said, rising to his feet. We need to pause briefly to verify a detail. He handed the email to Grayson, his voice low and sharp. Read this, then explain why we nearly signed a contract that placed all financial risk on us. Grayson went pale, flipping frantically through the original document. I didn't see that line, he stammered. The French partners exchanged glances. One of them asked to see the original. After a few moments of review, they nodded. This clause must be amended, the lead partner said. We appreciate your attention to detail. The deal was salvaged. The partners agreed to sign once the revision was made, and the tension in the room eased. Alexander scanned the faces around the table, knowing exactly who had saved the day, but he said nothing for now. The next morning, Ellie was cleaning the office pantry when a staffer rushed in. Ms. Parker, Mr. Hunt wants to see you in the conference room. Right now. Ellie dropped her cleaning cloth, anxiety flaring. Had she crossed a line again? She took a deep breath and walked in. The senior legal team was seated around the table, their eyes drifting over Ellie like she didn't belong. Alexander stood at the head, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, his expression unreadable. Ms. Parker, he began, voice low but clear. Yesterday, thanks to your email, we avoided a serious error with our French partners. A $50 million deal was secured. On behalf of the firm, I thank you. The room fell silent. Ellie's face flushed, not from pride but from the stares of the others. Someone coughed. Someone else shook their head. Grayson, seated near the end of the table, muttered just loud enough for her to hear. She's just a janitor. What is this? Ellie clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She was used to condescension from teachers, employers, people who never saw her worth. But today she wouldn't stay quiet. She looked directly at Grayson, her voice calm but razor sharp. And yet I did your job better than you did, sir. If you don't want to hear it from a janitor, maybe read the contract more carefully next time. A faint chuckle rose from the corner of the room, quickly stifled. Grayson flushed red, about to reply, but Alexander raised a hand. "That's enough," he said, sweeping the room with his gaze. "Miss Parker, you may go." And just as she turned to leave, he added in a lower voice, "Well done." Ellie stepped out, her heart still racing. She didn't know if she had just won a victory or dug her own grave, but she had no regrets. She had done the right thing, and that was all that mattered. That night, Alexander sat in his office, Manhattan's lights glittering beyond the glass. He held his phone, rereading Ellie's email. Not a single wasted word, no bragging. She had chosen to send a private message rather than call out a senior attorney in front of foreign partners, an instinctive professionalism he rarely saw even in seasoned lawyers. But what struck him most was her poise when facing Grayson. She didn't ask to be protected. She didn't need him to step in. She had fought for herself. He remembered a day at Yale when a professor had called him the poor kid in front of the class. He had answered with a brilliant paper, but deep down, he had always felt the need to prove himself. Ellie wasn't like that. She didn't act to earn validation. She acted because she believed it was right. He opened his laptop and typed an email to the head of HR. "Develop a plan for a legal fellows program, an opportunity for candidates outside traditional channels. I want it launched this month." He paused, then added another line. "Ensure Ellie Parker is invited to participate, this time paid." He hit send and leaned back in his chair. Ellie Parker was not just a janitor. She was a reminder of why he had once fought for justice, not prestige. And for the first time in years, Alexander Hunt felt something unfamiliar. Hope, not for the firm, for himself. Chapter 5. Conversations Under the Lights. The 42nd floor of Hunt and Langford, LLP, was quiet beneath the sterile glow of white neon lights, save for the isolated tapping of keys from one corner of the office. Ellie Parker sat in an old armchair in the records room, a stack of legal documents spread out in front of her. She no longer wore the janitor's uniform tonight. She was here as a volunteer for the new pro bono legal counseling program recently launched by Alexander Hunt. She still didn't fully understand why he had invited her to join, but she hadn't said no. Not for him, but for the people who needed help. People like her mother, abandoned by the system. The door creaked open. Alexander stepped inside, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his usual CEO stiffness replaced with something more human. "You're still here," he said, setting a cup down in front of Ellie. "I figured you'd quit after the first night." Ellie raised an eyebrow, taking the cup but not drinking from it. "I don't quit easily, Mr. Hunt, and I'm here for the work, not for you." Her tone was sharp but not hostile, as if she were testing his limits. Alexander let out a soft laugh and took the seat across from her. "Call me Alexander. We're going to be working together many nights. No need to treat me like your boss." He scanned the pile of paperwork. "Have you reviewed Mrs. Torres's case yet? Single mother, evicted after an illegal rent hike?" Ellie nodded and slid a document toward him. "I've read it. New York's tenant protection laws are on her side, but the landlord has a private attorney. She needs strong representation, and we need to file by Friday." She paused, meeting his gaze. "Are you planning to let me handle this alone, or are you actually in?" Alexander smirked, a glint of challenge in his eyes. "You really don't mind pushing me, do you, Ellie?" He picked up the document and scanned it. "Fine. We'll do it together. But don't expect me to go easy on you just because you're a volunteer." They got to work, tension lingering between them, but it crackled with energy. Ellie broke down legal clauses. Alexander countered with tough questions. They debated every detail. Ellie was impressed by how quickly he absorbed complex information, but she also noticed the wall he kept up, as if he were constantly holding something back. When the clock struck midnight, they paused. Ellie looked out the window. Manhattan lights shimmered like stars against the dark sky. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her tone softer than usual. "I mean, this program. You're a CEO. You have dozens of lawyers under you. Why spend time on cases that don't bring in a dime?" Alexander glanced at her, his expression briefly faltering. He stood and walked toward the window, hands tucked into his pockets. "You think I only care about money?" His voice was quiet but edged, like she'd brushed against an old wound. No, Ellie replied, turning toward him. But you hide your real self. I see how you work. You care about Mrs. Torres, but you don't want anyone to see it. Why? He was silent, eyes on the city. Ellie thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice low like a confession. Because I used to believe in things bigger than myself. Justice, equality, all those lofty ideals. But I was betrayed. He turned back to her, his eyes shadowed. The person I trusted most walked away, left me with debt and a lesson. Never trust anyone but yourself. Ellie felt her chest tighten. She didn't press further. She knew the sting of betrayal, though in a different form. She'd grown up in the projects, where friends abandoned you the moment something better came along, but she hadn't let that make her bitter. Then why are you still here, she asked. If you don't believe anymore, why not just walk away? Alexander looked at her, and for a moment his gaze softened, like she'd asked something he hadn't dared ask himself. Because sometimes, he said, like when you caught the contract error, or when you stood up to Grayson, it reminds me of who I used to want to be. He paused, then gave a short laugh to mask the emotion. You're very good at making people question themselves, Ellie Parker. Ellie smiled for the first time, without any defense. And you're very good at dodging questions, Alexander Hunt. She raised her cup and took a sip. But I won't let you run forever. They returned to their work, but something had shifted. Laughter started to weave through the debates. Their glances lingered a second longer than necessary. Ellie began to see that he wasn't just an arrogant CEO, he was someone who used to dream, like her, and had been wounded by life. And Alexander found himself drawn to how she faced the world with no bitterness, no self-pity, even though she had every reason to carry both. As dawn neared, they finished drafting the complaint for Mrs. Torres. Ellie yawned and stacked the documents. We did good, didn't we? She said, tired but content. Very good, Alexander replied, his eyes on her, with a look he couldn't quite name. You're talented, Ellie. Not everyone could do what you just did. Ellie shrugged as she stood. I don't need compliments. I just want to help people like her. She slung her bag over her shoulder and turned back to him. But thank you for giving me this chance, even though I still don't know why. Alexander smiled, a real one this time, free of sarcasm. You'll understand, one day. He stood and walked with her. Let me escort you to the lobby. Queens isn't exactly safe at this hour. Ellie hesitated, then nodded. They stepped into the elevator together, the dim lights casting a soft glow over their faces. In the silence, Ellie felt something she couldn't quite define. Not love, but understanding. As if two people who had once been lost had somehow found each other. The next night, Ellie returned to the office, ready for another long shift. Alexander was already there, with a fresh coffee and a quiet smile. They didn't mention the conversation from the night before, but they both knew. A door had opened just a crack, and under the lights of Hunt and Langford LLP, two hearts were slowly learning how to trust again. Chapter 6. Rumors and Confrontation. The 42nd floor of Hunt and Langford LLP, once a beacon of hope for Ellie Parker, now felt suffocating under the weight of hushed whispers and furtive glances. She pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor, trying to ignore the sensation of eyes on her back. Ever since that night working alongside Alexander Hunt on the pro bono legal program, Ellie had noticed a shift in the office atmosphere. Administrative staff avoided her gaze, and a few senior attorneys murmured behind her back as she walked by. She wasn't naive, she knew exactly what they were whispering about. That morning, when Ellie picked up her schedule from HR, Mrs. Carter handed her a slip of paper with a cold expression. You've been reassigned to clean the basement, starting today, she said, offering no further explanation. Ellie gripped the paper, her chest tightening. The basement home to old files, broken equipment, and not a single window. It wasn't a job, it was punishment. She turned to ask why, but a cutting voice echoed from the corner of the room. Oh, don't look so surprised, Parker. Not everyone climbs the ladder by getting cozy with the boss. Sophia Langford stood there, arms crossed, her golden hair gleaming and her smile sharp as a blade. A senior attorney and Alexander's ex. The source of the rumors, clearly. that Ellie had slept her way into visibility. Ellie felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. If you have proof, bring it. Otherwise, don't waste my time. She turned and walked away, but Sophia's words stayed with her, echoing in her mind. This wasn't just gossip, it was an attack on everything Ellie had worked for. On her dignity. The basement was musty and dim. The smell of mildew from aging documents clung to the air. Ellie worked in silence, her pride slowly eroding with each sweep of the mop. She had rejected Alexander's pity, had stood up to Grayson, and yet here she was, pushed underground, as if everything she'd done had meant nothing. She began to wonder if she should give up, not on her dream, but on Hunt and Langford, a place where she'd never be seen as an equal. Back on the 42nd floor, Alexander Hunt stood at the window, jaw tight as his assistant delivered the news. Rumors about Ms. Parker are spreading fast, the assistant said. People are saying she got close to you for special treatment. The board met this morning. They voted to reassign her to the basement. They're trying to send a message. Alexander clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. He knew exactly where the rumors had started Sophia Langford. Ever since their breakup, she tried to maintain control in whatever way she could. But what enraged him more was the cowardice of the board. They didn't care about truth. They only wanted to snuff out any threat to their order. And Ellie, with her grit and brilliance, was a threat. "Call the board," Alexander said, voice like ice. "Now!" The meeting took place in the main conference room, the very room where Ellie had once saved a multi-million-dollar deal. Around the table sat the board, Grayson, Sophia, and 3 other senior attorneys. Alexander remained standing at the head of the table, hands in his pockets, tension radiating from him. "We need to talk about Ellie Parker," he began, his voice low but razor-sharp. "A janitor who prevented a critical contract error and has been contributing to our pro bono program. So tell me, why is she cleaning the basement?" Grayson coughed, casting a glance at Sophia. "Mr. Hunt, there are rumors about inappropriate behavior. We can't allow a lower-level employee to tarnish the firm's reputation." "Rumors?" Alexander's lip curled as his gaze landed on Sophia. "I don't need to guess where they came from, but if you're threatened by Ellie Parker because she's better at this than you are, then maybe you're the problem, not her." Sophia laughed brittle, forced. "You're not serious, are you, Alexander? She's a janitor. You let her into your pet project, and now the whole firm is laughing behind your back." Alexander stepped closer to her, his voice cutting. "Are they laughing behind my back? Or are they laughing because they're terrified a girl without an Ivy League degree might be outperforming them all?" He turned to the board. "I'm proposing the launch of a Legal Fellows program, a formal training opportunity for overlooked candidates like Ellie. If you won't back it, I'll fund it myself. And Ellie Parker will be the first one accepted." Grayson stood, his voice shaking. "This is a law firm, not a charity. We can't have a cleaning girl representing Hunt and Langford." Alexander stared him down, voice quiet but commanding. "If she threatens you this much, then maybe she should be running this place." He turned and walked out, leaving the room in stunned silence. That night, Ellie sat in the basement, the flickering light of an old desk lamp casting shadows across the walls. She opened her laptop and began preparing Mrs. Torres's case files, even if she wasn't sure she'd be allowed to see them through. She hadn't given up, not for Alexander, for herself. A knock sounded. Ellie looked up to see Alexander standing in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, the cold edge in his eyes softened. "You're still working," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice, "even after they sent you down here." Ellie shrugged, closing her laptop. "I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for the people who need me." She stood to face him. "What about you? Why are you here?" Alexander stepped into the room, his gaze locking on hers. "Because I want you back in the program, and because I just told the board they can either accept you or deal with me." He paused, his voice dropping. "You deserve better than this basement, Ellie." She looked at him, her emotions caught somewhere between belief and doubt. "I don't need you to fight for me," she said quietly. "I just need a fair chance." He nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching into something like a smile. "Then you'll get it. The Legal Fellows program is happening, and I want you to be the first." He turned to leave, then glanced back. "And Ellie, Don't let them make you doubt yourself. They're not worth it. Ellie stood still, the dim light flickering across her face. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in this fight. But she also knew the road ahead was still long, and she was ready to face it, with her dignity intact. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Chapter 7. The Letter in the Rain. Rain poured over Queens, turning muddy streets into shimmering mirrors under the dim glow of streetlights. Ellie Parker stood in the basement of Hunt and Langford LLP, gripping a broom in her hand, her eyes burning but weary. She had endured the rumors, the disdainful stares, and the moldy darkness of this place. But that morning had pushed her beyond her limit. During the all-staff meeting, Sophia Langford, with a smile as sharp as glass, publicly thanked Ellie in front of hundreds of employees. "We should acknowledge Ms. Parker," Sophia said in a syrupy, false sweet voice. "Not everyone can scrub floors and catch the CEO's attention." The room erupted in laughter that sliced into Ellie's dignity like 1,000 tiny knives. The board, including Grayson, sat silent. No one defended her. She stood in the corner in her janitor's uniform, feeling utterly exposed and stripped bare in front of the crowd. She had been ready to respond, but her phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. "Marie's condition has worsened. Emergency surgery required. Immediate payment of $20,000 needed." Her knees nearly gave out. Her mother was the reason she kept fighting, but now the dream of becoming a lawyer felt like a cruel joke. She returned to the basement, opened her laptop, and typed her resignation. "I resign, effective immediately." She hit send and didn't look back. The tiny apartment in Queens smelled of antiseptic and despair. Ellie sat beside her mother, Marie, who lay still beneath the oxygen mask. "Don't worry," Marie whispered. "I'll be okay." But Ellie knew better. Her mother wasn't okay, and neither was she. She had fought her entire life from the slums to long nights studying under a dim lamp, all the way to the basement of Hunt and Langford. But today she was done. The rumors, the humiliation, and the crushing hospital bills had drained every drop of strength from her. In Manhattan, Alexander Hunt stood in his office on the 42nd floor, Ellie's resignation email burning like a wound on his screen. He had heard what happened that morning. His assistant had given him a full report. Sophia's cruel jab, the board's silence, the laughter. His fist slammed against his desk, rage flooding through him. He had fought the board to protect Ellie. He hadn't expected them to take it this far. And now she had given up. He grabbed his phone. "Find Ellie Parker's home address," he told his assistant. "Now." Rain slammed against the windshield of his Mercedes as he drove to Queens. He had no idea what he was going to say. Alexander Hunt didn't chase after people. He didn't apologize. But Ellie wasn't just anyone. She was the one person who reminded him of who he used to be. Her boarding house emerged from the downpour, peeling paint, rusted stairs. He stepped out into the rain, suit drenched, and knocked on the door of Unit 3B. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Finally, the door opened. Ellie stood there in an old hoodie, eyes red, but her stare steely. "Mr. Hunt," she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "What are you doing here?" Alexander looked past her, his heart twisting as he saw Marie on the bed, the hiss of the ventilator filling the silence. "Ellie, I know about the meeting, about the rumors, about Sophia. You can't let them win." Ellie crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "Win? They already did. I resigned because I can't keep working in a place that strips me of my dignity." Her voice trembled, but she stood firm. "You don't understand, Alexander. You're the CEO. I'm just the janitor." He stepped closer, rain sliding down his face. "I do understand. I was once a poor kid in Ohio, mocked for dreaming of law school. I know what it's like to be dismissed." He paused, voice lowering. "Your mom is sick. I can pay the hospital bills. You don't need to walk away. Come back." Ellie's body stiffened, her eyes flaring with anger. "You think I'd sell my pride for money? I don't need your pity, Alexander." She moved to shut the door, but he caught it. "Wait," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to give you the chance you deserve." He pulled a soggy envelope from his coat. "Read this. If you still want me gone after, I'll leave." Ellie hesitated, then took the envelope and shut the door, leaving Alexander standing alone in the rain, his eyes filled with the same pain as that boy in Ohio who once got told he'd never be enough. Inside, Ellie sat at the table, hands trembling as she opened the envelope. The ink was smudged from the rain, but the handwriting was still legible, each word etched deep into her heart. "Ellie, I'm not good at apologies, but I owe you one. I was wrong to let you face the board alone. You are the only person at Hunt and Langford brave enough to speak the truth, to stand tall, even when the world tried to tear you down. I used to be like you, a poor boy working in a grocery store, laughed at for dreaming of law school. I rose up, but somewhere along the way, I lost my reason why. You reminded me that I once fought for justice, not prestige. Don't give up. Not for me, for yourself. You deserve to be seen. I'll fight for your place, not out of pity, but because I believe in you. Alexander." Ellie folded the letter, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't crying out of sadness, but because for the first time, someone had seen her. Alexander hadn't just apologized, he'd opened a part of himself she knew few had ever seen. She looked over at her mother, still sleeping. Marie had always said, "Don't let the world make you doubt yourself." Ellie wiped her tears, clutching the letter to her chest. She felt torn, not because of the money, not because of the offer, but because in Alexander, she saw someone who had once lost his way, just like her, and was now trying to find his way back. The rain still fell outside, but inside Ellie's heart, for the first time in a long while, a flicker of hope stirred. Chapter 8. The Nameless Legal Advocate. The Manhattan Housing Court sat quietly beneath the muted glow of early morning light. Footsteps echoed over its worn stone floors, mixing with the murmurs of anxious tenants awaiting their hearings. Ellie Parker stood in front of a cracked mirror in the women's restroom, adjusting a borrowed blazer from her roommate. It wasn't an expensive lawyer's suit, but she didn't need polish today. She was here to help Rosa Torres, a single mother fighting an illegal eviction. Ellie clutched the file folder in her hand and took a deep breath. Alexander Hunt's letter, though left at home, still echoed in her mind. "Don't give up. You deserve this." Since resigning from Hunt and Langford LLP, Ellie had spent 3 days preparing this case. She wasn't doing it for money. Mrs. Torres had nothing to give. She did it because it was right, because Alexander's words had rekindled something inside her. She had studied New York's tenant protection laws, coached Mrs. Torres on how to present in court, and prepped every supporting document. Today, Mrs. Torres would represent herself pro se, but Ellie would be there beside her, handing her papers, whispering guidance. She stepped into the courtroom with steady eyes, though her heart pounded. The room was packed, strangers filling the public benches. Mrs. Torres, in a worn sweater, squeezed Ellie's hand, her eyes anxious. On the plaintiff's side stood a sharp-suited attorney from a large firm, confidently stating, "Mrs. Torres failed to pay the increased rent raised from $1,200 to $2,000, thus violating her lease. The eviction is lawful." Ellie scribbled notes, leaning over to quietly reassure Mrs. Torres. She knew the opposing counsel was glossing over a critical legal point. When the judge, a stern-faced man in his 50s, called on Mrs. Torres, Ellie handed her the highlighted file. Mrs. Torres rose, voice trembling. "Your Honor, I don't agree with the eviction. The landlord raised the rent without notice." She looked helplessly at Ellie. With the judge's permission, Ellie stood. Her voice was clear. "Your Honor, I'm Ellie Parker. I'm assisting Mrs. Torres as a volunteer. May I clarify with supporting documents?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're not an attorney?" Ellie shook her head. "No, sir, but I've studied this case extensively and have evidence to present." He nodded. "Proceed." Ellie stepped forward. Under Section 7, Article 223B of New York tenant law, landlords must provide at least 60 days' notice for a rent increase. Mrs. Torres received only a text message 1 week prior. This violates that statute. Here are the lease and the message as evidence. She handed over the documents, her voice calm but sharp. The opposing attorney objected, tried to rattle Mrs. Torres with procedural questions, but Ellie whispered suggestions, steadying her. When the attorney brought up precedent, hoping to confuse her, Ellie stood again. Your Honor, in Rivera versus Landlord, 2018, the court ruled that unlawful rent increases void eviction proceedings. Mrs. Torres has the right to remain and seek damages. Her argument was precise. The opposing attorney faltered, flipping through papers in panic. In the back row, Alexander Hunt sat silently, his gray suit blending into the crowd. He had come after his assistant mentioned a pro bono housing case. He hadn't planned to approach Ellie just to see her after the letter he left in the rain. But as she spoke with confidence and moral clarity, his heart pounded. Ellie wasn't just brilliant. She was a natural-born advocate, with the fire he had long forgotten. And in that moment, as she looked the judge in the eye without flinching, he realized he didn't just respect her. He loved her, not for her talent, but for her heart, a heart that fought for the forgotten. The judge cleared his throat. Eviction request denied. Landlord is ordered to pay damages to Mrs. Torres under applicable law. Mrs. Torres burst into tears, hugging Ellie. A few spectators murmured praise, and the judge nodded at her. Well done, Ms. Parker. I rarely see anyone this prepared who isn't an attorney. Ellie smiled, eyes brimming. Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to help Mrs. Torres. She paused, then looked out at the courtroom. And I want to thank someone who reminded me not to give up just when I thought I couldn't go on. That person knows who they are. Alexander lowered his head, hiding the mix of emotion in his expression. She hadn't said his name, but the gratitude in her voice was meant for him. His letter had reached her, just as she had reached him. He knew she didn't need him, but he wanted to be beside her, to learn from her how to live with heart again. Ellie stepped out of the courthouse into the morning light of Manhattan. The sun broke through the clouds, shining on her face. Mrs. Torres held her hand tightly, repeating her thanks. You're my angel, she whispered. Ellie shook her head. I just did the right thing. When Mrs. Torres left, Ellie remained for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. She didn't know Alexander had been there, but she felt something, his presence perhaps, his words still with her. In the car back to Hunt and Langford LLP, Alexander stared out the window, images of Ellie flooding his mind. The Legal Fellows program had been approved, and he would make sure she was the first. Not because he loved her, but because she deserved it, and because he wanted to learn from her how to believe in justice again. Ellie returned to her apartment in Queens, setting the documents gently on the table. Her mother, still weak, smiled. You made me proud today, Marie said. Ellie held her mother's hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. She pulled Alexander's letter from the drawer and read it once more. She was ready to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for all the Mrs. Torreses still waiting to be seen. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. Chapter 9, A Chance of Her Own. The 42nd floor of Hunt and Langford. LLP gleamed under the glow of LED lights, but to Ellie Parker, the brightness no longer felt foreign. 2 weeks ago, she had received an email from Alexander Hunt, informing her she had been selected for the Legal Fellows Program, an initiative designed to train candidates who came from outside traditional recruiting channels. She had hesitated. The memory of rumors and humiliation during the company meeting still haunted her. But Alexander's letter, its ink smudged by rain, had reignited a fire within her. She returned not for him, but to prove her worth to Hunt and Langford and to herself. Today was her first day as a legal fellow. She sat in the training room, a sleek space with wooden tables and a wall-sized screen. 4 other candidates, all graduates from elite law schools, gave her sideways glances filled with curiosity and quiet skepticism. Ellie wore a borrowed blazer, her hair tied back, pen gripped tightly in her hand. She knew what they were thinking. What's the janitor doing here? But she didn't care. She was here to learn, to work, and to seize an opportunity no one could take from her. Helen Carter, the supervising attorney, handed out the first assignment, an analysis of a mock international contract dispute. You have 3 days to prepare your reports and present to the board, she said. Show us what you've got. Ellie scribbled down notes, her mind already parsing contract clauses and legal precedents. This wasn't just an exercise, this was her chance to prove she belonged. In the days that followed, Ellie worked relentlessly. By day, she buried herself in the firm's law library, poring over thick legal tomes and online rulings. By night, she returned to the apartment in Queens, writing her report under the dim desk lamp. Her mother, Marie, still weak from surgery, smiled at her from the bed. "You make me proud," she whispered. Ellie held her hand, heart heavy with the weight of unpaid bills. But last week, something strange had happened. The hospital had called to inform her that all of Marie's surgery and treatment costs had been fully covered by an anonymous donor. Ellie suspected Alexander, but she didn't ask. Her pride wouldn't let her. What she didn't know was that Alexander, from his office on the 42nd floor, had quietly arranged everything. After she rejected him in the rain, he understood she would never accept charity, but he couldn't bear to watch her carry it all alone. He reached out to the hospital through the firm's charitable foundation and requested his identity remain hidden. "She doesn't need to know," he told his assistant. "Just make sure her mother gets what she needs." He didn't do it to win her over. He did it because he believed she deserved the freedom to chase her dreams without being crushed by the weight of survival. Alexander watched from afar, reading Carter's weekly reports. Ellie asked the toughest questions, spotted a clause flaw the others missed, and worked with a level of focus that left Helen Carter stunned. Alexander was proud, but it was more than that. He didn't just want her to succeed. He wanted to be near her, to learn from the resilience and heart she carried like armor. Presentation day arrived quickly. Ellie stood in the firm's main conference room, the very place she'd once been humiliated by Sophia Langford. The board, Grayson, Sophia, and 3 senior attorneys sat around the table, their expressions cool and assessing. Alexander sat at the head, navy suit crisp, eyes unreadable but quietly expectant. Ellie was the last to present. She took a breath and stepped forward, report in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, this hypothetical case involves an international contract dispute regarding compensation terms. Clause 12.4 imposes a 20% penalty for delays in delivery by Party A. However, this contradicts Article 74 of the CISG, which requires reasonable limitations on damages." She cited statutes, dissected precedent, and proposed clear amendments. Her voice was steady, precise. Sophia crossed her arms, searching for holes, but Ellie had anticipated every question. "I recommend renegotiating Clause 12.4 to align with international standards and protect the company's interests," she concluded, locking eyes with the board. Silence fell. Helen Carter nodded, scribbling notes. Grayson murmured, "Impressive for someone without formal legal training." Sophia scoffed quietly, but said nothing. Alexander stood, eyes fixed on Ellie. "Ms. Parker," he said, "your report will be reviewed for inclusion in real casework. Well done." Ellie exited the room, her heart pounding. She had stood her ground in front of the very people who once dismissed her. But as she returned to the training room, her phone rang. "Ms. Parker, we're calling to confirm that the next phase of your mother's treatment has also been paid in full by the same anonymous donor." Ellie gripped the phone, her thoughts spinning. She knew it was Alexander. No one else had the motive or the heart. She wanted to confront him, but deep down, she also sensed the sincerity behind it. That afternoon, Alexander called Ellie to his office. She walked in to find him standing beside his desk, holding a small card. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a glow across his steady expression. "This is for you," he said, handing her the card. "Your official legal fellow ID. This isn't a gift from me, Ellie. This is something you earned." She took the card, fingers tracing the embossed words. Ellie Parker, legal fellow. Tears threatened, but she held them back. "Thank you, Alexander," she said, her voice firm. "But I know about the hospital. Why did you do it and not tell me?" He blinked, surprised she had found out. He stepped closer, voice low. "Because I knew you'd never accept it, but I couldn't let you carry it all alone. I didn't do it out of pity, I did it because I believe in you, and I wanted you to have the chance to fight on your own terms." Ellie looked at him, torn between anger and gratitude. She inhaled deeply. "I won't let you down, but I need to be clear I'll walk my own path. I don't need anyone to lead me, not even you." Alexander smiled genuinely. "I don't doubt that, but if you'll let me, I'd like to walk beside you, not to lead, but to see just how far you'll go." His eyes met hers, filled with admiration and something deeper. Ellie nodded, then turned to leave, the badge clutched tightly in her hand like a promise. She was no longer the girl who scrubbed floors. She was Ellie Parker, legal fellow, and she would prove her worth. That evening, Ellie sat beside her mother, recounting the day. Marie held her hand, her eyes glowing. "You make me proud," she whispered. Ellie smiled through her tears. She thought of Alexander not just as the man who opened a door, but as someone who believed in her when she no longer could. She felt a connection now, like two hearts once lost were finally finding their way toward each other. Chapter 10. The Contract of Two Hearts. The early summer sunlight poured through the windows of the small office on the 42nd floor of Hunt and Langford LLP, casting golden rays over Ellie Parker's walnut desk. 2 years ago, this room had been a janitor's break space, filled with worn-out chairs and the stale scent of old coffee. Now it was her private office, a symbol of her journey and the respect she had earned. Dressed in a perfectly fitted blue blazer, Ellie stared at the nameplate on her door. Ellie Parker. Her heart swelled with pride, gratitude, and a touch of disbelief at how far she had come. For the past 2 years, Ellie and Alexander had worked side by side on the firm's pro bono legal outreach program, supporting tenants like Rosa Torres. Late-night debates under the fluorescent office lights had brought them closer. Alexander was no longer the arrogant CEO who once mocked her. He was now her partner in work and in purpose, who deeply respected her integrity. And Ellie, with her unyielding honesty and fierce heart, had helped him rediscover the ideals he had long buried. Their feelings had grown slowly through glances, shared laughter, and long silences, heavy with meaning. Today, Alexander sat across from her, his gaze more serious than usual. "Ellie, there's something I need to say." He paused, twisting a silver pen between his fingers, an old habit when he was nervous. "When I met you, I had forgotten who I used to be. Just a poor kid from Ohio, working in a corner store, dreaming of becoming a lawyer to fight for justice. Success made me arrogant. I thought only Ivy League graduates mattered. But you changed that." Ellie's heart thudded. She had never heard him speak with such raw honesty. "Alexander, you don't have to say all this. I know what you've done, the hospital donations, the legal fellows program. I never properly thanked you." Alexander shook his head and stood. He stepped closer and pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket, placing it gently before her. "Read this. It says it better than I ever could." Ellie opened it. Her eyes landed on the title, Contract for the Future. There was only one clause written in his crisp handwriting. Clause 1. Ellie Parker and Alexander Hunt agree to build a future together, built on respect, trust, and love. She laughed through her tears. Of course this wasn't a proposal. Not yet. It was a confession, written in the only language a lawyer like him knew best. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice trembling, half amused. "A contract? You can't just say it like a normal person?" Alexander smiled, eyes soft. "I'm a lawyer, Ellie. I'm better with contracts than with speeches. But if you want it plain and simple, I love you. Not because you're brilliant or because you changed me. I love you because you're you, the only person who makes me want to be a better man." Ellie stood, facing him fully. Her heart beat wildly. She had once doubted him, thought he was just another privileged executive. But over these 2 years, he had proven himself as someone who believed in her, even when she doubted herself. She held the contract, voice steady. "I'll sign it, Alexander, but only as an equal partner, not an employee, not someone you rescued. We build this future together, side by side." He took her hand in his, warm and steady. "Equal partners," he repeated, smiling. "That's all I've ever wanted." And there they stood in a room once reserved for janitors, now bathed in Manhattan light, writing a new kind of contract, one sealed not by law, but by love. 3 years later, may sunshine stream through the wide windows of Hunt and Langford LLP, glinting off a new nameplate, Ellie Parker, Esquimalt. She had earned her Juris Doctor from Brooklyn Law School, passed the New York bar with distinction, and was now a licensed attorney. Her journey from cleaning floors to becoming one of the firm's most promising young lawyers was a testament to persistence, compassion, and unshakable integrity. She stood in her office, once the janitor's break room, and gazed out over the glimmering Manhattan skyline. But her true success wasn't measured by multi-million-dollar contracts or courtroom wins. It was in the pro bono program she and Alexander had expanded, bringing justice to those the system had left behind. From single mothers like Rosa Torres to struggling immigrant families, Ellie had represented hundreds, pouring her heart into every case. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a flame of hope. Her mother, Marie, now healthier, lived in a small but cozy apartment in Queens, cared for by Ellie's steady income, and quietly, a donation from Alexander that Ellie had eventually accepted with gratitude, often teasing him for being a secret philanthropist in a suit. Ellie continued to visit community schools, inspiring students to chase their dreams, reminding them that you didn't need privilege to change the world. Today was special. Ellie entered the Manhattan courthouse, not to argue a case, but to begin a new chapter. She wore a simple white knee-length dress, her hair down in loose waves, her eyes shining with joy. Alexander stood waiting in the hallway, dressed in a sharp black suit, a rare but genuine smile on his face. They had chosen a courthouse wedding, no extravagance, no grand ballroom. Just a quiet vow, sincere and deeply felt, in true Ellie and Alexander fashion. The courtroom was softly decorated with white flowers and filled with only a few close friends. Marie sat in the front row, tears rolling down her cheeks. Some colleagues from Hunt and Langford, including Helen Carter, smiled in quiet support. Even Sophia Langford was present, her sternness softened after witnessing Ellie's brilliance, offering a polite nod from the back. The judge, an older woman who had once presided over Rosa Torres's eviction case, stood at the bench with warmth in her eyes. "We are here to witness the union of Ellie Parker and Alexander Hunt," she began, "but I'm told they've chosen a very lawyerly way of exchanging vows." Alexander stepped forward and pulled out a neatly folded paper, a new contract, written in his familiar handwriting. He handed it to Ellie, his eyes glowing with affection. "3 years ago, I gave you a contract about building a future. Today, I want to sign a new one with forever in mind." Ellie opened it and smiled through her tears. Soul clause. Ellie Parker and Alexander Hunt promised to love, honor, and fight for justice together. Always. She laughed, voice trembling. "You still can't say it like a normal person, can you?" He took her hands, his voice low but full of emotion. "I love you, Ellie. Not just because you're the best lawyer I know, but because you taught me how to live with a heart. I want to spend the rest of my life learning from you." Ellie squeezed his hands, her gaze unwavering. "I love you too, Alexander. And I'm signing this contract not just as a lawyer, but as the woman who will stand beside you, equal and true, as we build something better together." She signed. He signed. Laughter rippled through the room. The judge smiled. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alexander pulled Ellie into his arms and kissed her softly, as their guests erupted in warm applause. Marie wiped away joyful tears and whispered, "You found your happiness, my girl." After the ceremony, Ellie and Alexander returned to Hunt and Langford not for work, but to host a small gathering for the pro bono team. They sat surrounded by people who had become family young attorneys, former clients like Rosa, and students from the community. Alexander raised a glass, his gaze lingering on Ellie. "To justice," he said, "and to people like Ellie who remind us that the heart matters just as much as the law." Ellie smiled and squeezed his hand beneath the table. Outside the window, Manhattan buzzed with life, but to her it felt different now. She wasn't just a successful attorney. She was a dream made real for herself and for everyone who had once been left behind. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a testament to persistence, to principle, and to love. And in that office that once smelled of old coffee, Ellie and Alexander wrote a new kind of law. Love, respect, never giving up. Under the Manhattan lights, they walked into the future together, whole and home at last.